You can learn a lot about somebody by reading their mail, but you shouldn't do that because it's illegal. Unless the person's been dead for over 200 years. Then it's okay. I'd encourage it even, because you might just find something unexpected. Today, we're very excited to be talking with author John Smith about his new book, The Unexpected Abigail Adams, a woman not apt to be intimidated. This is Too Complicated for History. I am Isaac Loftus, and I'm joined with my co-host, Dr. Lynn Robbins, and every 2 weeks, we bring you conversations about history that fell through the cracks of your curriculum.
Today we have with us, we're very happy to have with us, John Smith, who is the author of a brand new book titled The Unexpected Abigail Adams, a woman not apt to be intimidated. Thanks for being with us today, John.
Oh, thank you for having me.
So we're really excited. I'm really excited to talk about Abigail, one of my favorite first ladies, favorite women in history.
Yes.
And so the first question that I want to ask, which I think is an easy question, is why did you pick Abigail? Why not someone else? What about her is so special?
Well, it has to go back to the pandemic, like a lot of things did with the pandemic. And I had been doing a blog every day called American Revolution History Bits. And I thought, well, if I'm going to be locked into the house for a year or two, which is what it would take, maybe I'll do that long-awaited book I've been thinking about. So I went on Founders Online, and I hope all your listeners occasionally know what Founders Online is, because it's the best use of your tax dollars I can think of. Yeah. So I started reading Founders Online, looking for a person who had letters who was interesting. I couldn't find any. And then I stumbled is the word, across Abigail, and I knew a little bit about Abigail from the HBO documentary and so on. But I started reading her letters, and I was astonished. She writes really good letters, and they're all in a certain form, but her beautiful penmanship and her organization. So I started reading Abigail, and I was getting good quotes, which I needed, and her letters were just incredibly amazing stuff. So I kind of picked Abigail right there. I read some of the books that had been out on her, and they were all at least 10 years old. But the more important thing I found was all of them were lacking a certain something. And that something was they had all been heavily edited with things taken out. And the letters, of course, you see in the original source, those questionable things are still in the letters. So that's when it hit me that, man, this is great.
When you say questionable, what do you mean by questionable?
Well, like all people, she had another side of her, even back then. She did have some faults, like we all do. And some of her faults was sometimes we call it a potty mouth, or for her, I'm sure it was a potty mouth, or she was very controlling. This came up in her letters, controlling person, and so on like that most people, myself included, never knew about her. And so those are some of the questionable things, which of course are in her still.
Necessary mouth. Sorry.
Yeah.
That's what they call bathrooms.
Yeah.
Necessary.
The necessary.
That was a bad
The
joke.
necessary, yeah.
That was the closest that I've ever heard you get to a dad joke the entire time knowing you.
Spending too much time with you guys, yeah.
Yeah. So Abigail became my person of focus. And Laura Linney did a great job as Abigail in the series, but after all, the series was called John Adams, so they didn't give her too much airtime. But I'll tell you, after reading her life and her letters, she needs her own HBO series by far.
Yes.
Probably arguably more than John.
Yeah,
I agree with that.
She is an interesting person because
Yes.
she is so closely associated with John, but reading her letters and just how sort of broad her group of friends were, like people that sought out her advice and other people beyond John Adams.
Yes.
You get the impression that had this not been the 18th century, she would have really been, kind of in the thick of it, as far politically speaking, or as far as in the halls of power. She was probably a mind before her time.
Yes, exactly. Brilliant, very, very intelligent person and a quick reader. I meant she grew up without organized schooling and learned a lot from her mother, and then just started reading books from her father's library and her grandfather and uncle, and just absorbed everything around her. And John noticed that when they first dated.
So she must have grown up in a pretty high class. Her parents had money. Was she sort of in a top tier family, or?
I would call them by today's language, maybe upper middle class.
Okay.
Her father was a Congregationalist minister named Reverend Smith. By the way, her maiden name is Smith. Let's not forget that. That
shows good last name.
You're starting off at a very intelligent level. So she read all of his books, all of the books her father had, but she absorbed it, and they weren't in that, upper tier class, but it didn't matter to her because she is just absorbed in books. She had rheumatic fever a lot when she was little, and it carried on through the years, and so she didn't get the chance to go to school, even if she could have. But she didn't need it. She just absorbed everything around her.
That's so you mentioned that when her and John started dating, that's actually something that isn't covered at all in that HBO miniseries. So I think as far as popular history goes, it might be unfamiliar. How did they meet?
Yeah.
Well, it started off with John and his college buddy from Harvard, Richard Cranch, and I whenever I read the description of them, they sound like the Saturday Night Fever guys, two wild and crazy guys.
John Adams you're talking about?
Yeah, you would never know it, but he was a different guy then. But they ganged up and heard that there's 2 eligible girls at Reverend Smith's house. So let's go down to Weymouth Landing and introduce ourselves to them. So they did. Richard and Mary, which was Abigail's eldest sister, and probably her closest friend next to John, hit it off, and they started official courting, whereas John and Abigail, not so much, And so that went on for about 2 more years, the courting of John and Abigail.
Oh, wow.
And they were pretty young,
love
too.
At first sight.
No, and she was 17, he was 27, so that's no different. So finally, when you were 19 and 29, they got engaged. And some people think, why would Abigail marry somebody like John Adams? He's been equated to a volcano, an exploding volcano. But I think Abigail saw the intelligence and all of the good qualities. She would have to have seen all the good qualities in John. That's where she fell in love with him, and he her. You can't think of John as being romantic, but there was a romantic side of him. And so they got married, and they had a good life, a good married life, at least in the first year, because from the day that they married until the date when their first child was born, Nappy, was exactly 9 months.
Oh.
So you can exactly to the date. So that's sounds funny. Like him. But that's how I started.
Well, I think that description of them not getting along at first, it feels very relatable. I mean, I think there's a lot of people that, end up either dating or marrying someone who, their first impression was not necessarily like, head over heels. And you're like, I don't know if I like this person.
Yeah.
But there's something that grows on you over time.
Yeah.
And I know.
Go ahead.
I always think of John Adams as he's always portrayed as kind of grumpy, stubborn.
And that's on a good day, I think.
Let's not think about the bad days.
No.
But I think, wasn't Abigail a little stubborn too? I mean, I could see those two sort of going head to head.
Yeah, she had her own faults, if you call them, or idiosyncrasies, which had all been edited out. Quick story about that was in 1840, the popularity of Abigail was starting to grow. And so her grandson, Charles Francis Adams Sr., saw that there was a big need for books on Abigail's letters, his grandmother. So he published the letters, but when he had complete control over the what went in. And so he's famous for doing heavy editing and taking out anything that could bring disfavor upon Abigail or the whole Adams family. And those books stayed in the population for a long time, and actually until the letters came out, published online.
Wow.
Yeah, that's a really great, what you described is actually one of something that Lynn and I talk a lot about in our other work in general, is that about historiography at large, and making sure that you're going back to the primary sources, because a book that cites another book that cites another book that cites another book that's 200 years old is, they
just perpetuate the mistakes actually.
Yeah, exactly. That's why it's really important to go back to the source, which is cool that the whole journey for you started at Founders Online, which is literally a repository of those original sources, which is very cool.
And I've read some of the things that I put in the book because they're in there, but I'm reading, I go, oh no, Abigail, you didn't say that. So, oh my Lord, no wonder this is taken out.
I can see why he wanted to, maybe just omit the dates of the first child being born because of the implication.
Exactly.
As your grandson, you're like, you know what? People don't really want to know that.
Right.
Like, listen, speak for yourself, dude.
They do, but you don't know to give it to them. So
right.
Yeah.
Do you know about how many letters you went through, or how many exist? I mean, I'm sure it was quite a bit.
The Massachusetts Historical Society, who owns most of the letters, or at least they stay there as a repository, think that Abigail wrote from her 1760s to 1818 when she died, probably went through 2,300 letters.
Wow.
And
goodness.
And they have a lot of them there, but of course a lot of them are still in the family, still be owned by families. Some have been thrown overboard when the British ship was overtaking the American ship. And but 2,300, and I probably read close to 1,800, 1,900 letters.
Wow.
And some were interesting and some were not, but I was always, it's like mining for gold. You're always panning through the stuff. You go, oh, wait a minute, I have to reread that. Yes, she really said that. So
I have a question, since you're coming at this very recently, and this giant catalog of letters. How did you organize all of those things? Like, what did when you were going through this? Because some of them letters are mundane. Like, hey, can you pick this stuff up when you come through Boston? We need it at that, or something like that. I'm sure, very, very not important. But how did you parse what was important? How did you catalog those things and keep track of them over 1,800?
That's a good question. You have to kind of have to know something about history so that you know that what she's saying here turns out to be really important in the future. And that's something
very good point.
We have, and that she didn't have the pleasure of having. But you just read it over and try to organize it yourself, because the problem is letters skipped over themselves all the time, because sometimes they'd be held up, sometimes late in coming. And so your first paragraph, especially to John, was always, here's what I just read from you. Here's what I want to write back to you. And they had to kind of categorize their letters for each other to even know what they're doing.
I hadn't thought about that.
Summarize. This is what you said. Here's my answer. That's interesting.
Exactly. And that helps the person in the 21st century try to make heads or tails of them also.
Yeah.
And then she goes on to the second paragraph, which usually she followed a good organization. The second paragraph was probably the gist of the news. Here's what I want to tell you. The third one is what are the kids doing? And the fourth one, or then PS, that's where I found all the gold. If you're siphoning for gold, was all where all the good stuff was, like PS, by the way. And she followed that for the most part, yes. One thing that talks about her real quickly is a proper lady of the time. Letter writing was very, very important, not only for communication, but it was the main way that they could pace themselves as a very smart woman who is eligible to be married. And what you're supposed to do is write the letter and then write it a second time, correcting grammar, taking out all your smudges and blips, and then a third one that you're happy with. She didn't have time for all that. And this is very symbolic of her. She wrote the letter, but she didn't have time for that nonsense. She called it trash. She told the person to burn it. This is horrible, burn it. Luckily, nobody ever did. But she would write the letter, but then we get on with her busy life because she had a very busy life. And that's also sort of symbolic of Abigail.
Right. She wasn't sort of in that echelon where you just write letters all day and then do a little knitting.
Most
she
of the time,
actually was busy.
She was very busy. Late at night, she would write a lot of the letters by candlelight, the proverbial candlelight and quill pen. And that was after a day which would make most of us, fall asleep at the dinner table at 6 o'clock at night. So she was really good when it came to that stuff. Now, the stuff she put in the letters is all another story, sometimes.
So speaking of that, I think one of her most famous letters, and I guess, Isaac, you can verify if you think it is the Remember the Ladies letter to John.
Well, you go ahead, Lynn. Sorry. I was going to say, you're giving me too many credit thinking that I can quote multiple Abigail Adams letters from memory.
Well, this is just...
I'm aware of the one you're talking about, but that may be the only one that I know three words from by rote.
You're not supposed to admit that.
Exactly.
So there's the Remember the Ladies, and then also his response to the Remember the Ladies. So can you tell us a little bit about that interaction?
Yeah, Lynn, do you want to tee up some context for those who might not be as in the know as me?
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Right. So this is during, when is this when they're writing the Constitution, John? I'm not even sure the date of this letter.
This was about spring of 1776.
Okay, so she knew, so it's the Declaration of Independence,
right? And she knew that was going on, and she wanted to.
Right.
She made a deal with Mercy, her best friend, to put something in there to talk about help the women. Remember the ladies.
So she's saying, remember the ladies. All men would be tyrants if they could.
Yes.
So that's what she quotes. I'm pretty sure it's pretty.
She did, and that is a good job. She's quoting Daniel Defoe, who wrote Robinson Crusoe, but without libel laws. He was quoting from Cato, a popular play at the time. So he goes around. Nobody used quote marks or anything. But she put that in there. But to different generations, remember the ladies. And you're right, that's the main thing that most people know her for.
Mm-hmm.
Different generations, that means different things.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And for a long time, it never meant in 1840, the right to vote. Women weren't even thinking that. That'd be crazy talk. Although Abigail did say once in a letter that towards the end of her life, if we had the right to vote, I certainly would have voted. But she knew in her lifetime that wouldn't come about. History goes from mammoth things like that. It goes in little tiny steps. And really what she and Mercy were talking about was establishing some type of law which would prohibit being husbands from beating their wives. That was a huge thing then, and it was not easily talked about, but that's what they were pushing towards.
Yeah, right. You can definitely pull a ton of meaning from that.
Right, and I think today we'll say, she meant give women the vote and make them citizens, and just like you said, John, it's a step-by-step small process of gains, not a,
That's funny. I thought something as tangible as like, hey, intramarital abuse that makes a lot of sense that from like a practical standpoint. But, my first thought like drifted more like philosophical as far as that interpretation, meaning, women don't have the ability to exercise sort of power in the same way that men do physically.
No power.
Right? So
Zero power.
Yeah, they have no power. So all of the power that they have to exert is through deliberation and negotiation within these. Basically, the kind of government they were setting up was sort of had to deal with each other the way women have to deal with, because no one could basically physically force someone to go do something.
Right.
To go vote a certain way. So they needed a deliberative body that sort of operated that has a feminine touch to it as far as how it is exerting its power.
Exactly. Very complicated. But Lynn mentioned, the answer back from John Adams people who love John Adams are a little disappointed that his answer was so sarcastic. But basically what he was saying was, oh yeah, that would be nice. And then let's free everybody. Let's give everybody unlimited rights. And he went to this long list of people and situations that you're looking for. You would unleash the demons all over America. We're trying to break away from Britain, and you're thinking what life would be like then.
And I can just imagine the look on her face.
Yeah, she
read
I think she was expecting it. So,
That's true. She knew. I mean, she knows her husband, so
Yeah.
I'm sure she wasn't expecting a
But she never
interaction
brought that-
reminds
party
me-
agreement.
That interaction reminds me so much of like a couple at dinner when
Yeah.
someone says something they don't expect such a vitriolic response, and just
Exactly.
a quiet car ride home. Like
Exactly.
that's- right.
Yeah.
Very quiet.
Quiet carriage ride. Yeah.
Yeah,
And I-
quiet carriage ride home.
And I have a couple examples of those in the book where,
Oh.
and they were taken out by my friend Charles Francis Adams. But a couple of those where there's a couple snits they were in, and what she said back to him, I'll read it real quick.
Yes,
This
please
was
do.
in December 1778. And remember, they had been writing for about 4 or 5 months, Abigail much more than John.
Mhm.
But they were it was a harsh winter, 1778, and they were kind of tired of the whole thing. Like a couple, they weren't going to get divorced, but you could tell there's a strain in it because Abigail says, "You make no mention of having received a line from me. If I'd become so little important as not worth noticing in your own hand, be so kind as to direct me to your secretary." And then John replied back, "Oh, it is now my turn to complain." This isn't the type of stuff you'd know from Abigail and John. "I suppose I must write every day in order to keep, or rather to restore, good humor, whether I have anything to say or not." So they went, and eventually they worked
Why
out
didn't
that,
you
of course.
text me? I have nothing to say. Just
Yeah.
text me that you're okay. Yeah.
And then
You
shortly
said you
after
were going to
that,
text me when you get there, and you
Yeah.
didn't.
you
I
did.
thought-
I'm still
Right.
waiting.
It's so
Your
it
carriage
feels
had turned
so
over.
relatable. Like
Yeah.
that is
Some things don't
unfor-
change. It's just-
Yeah, it's unfortunate how similar. You'd think, oh, this is one of the founding fathers. They have this.
Yeah.
This very heightened view of
Yeah.
of them in general, that generation, or how people acted and how they were proper back in the
Yeah.
day in the 18th
They
century.
were people, and they had the same
Yeah.
thing. I have another really quick one.
Sure.
Oh,
Instead
you
of
don't have to be quick. We want to hear the snits. and
oh
the
well, okay, I have a
arguments.
lot of stuff here.
This is relatable.
Instead of remember the ladies, she was always whatever that meant. Abigail, her whole life was going for women's education. Education for women was her lifelong cause, and she felt if the new republic's going to be successful, it has to have educated children to grow into educated men. And in a very short letter from John had gone to Paris, and he'd already been gone 4 months, and he took another couple months to reply back to her, and she was counting the days, and she was a little bit unnerved by it. And John's letter, he said he had to get it in, he had to finish it before the ship took off. And so it was a very short letter, even after 4.5 months. And all he did was talk about how beautiful and educated the women are. And I'm thinking, John,
Come on, man. Get a clue.
some things just, what are you, nuts? A very short one. And he ended up telling Abigail, don't be jealous, John, you idiot. This is beautiful. Abigail answered back, see what happens when you let women get educated? Bingo.
It's funny and cold at
And
the same
cold,
time.
which is,
Right?
which is what you're looking for.
That's so funny that you can. Oh, imagine it. That's so funny. You can read the thing, and you're like, "Oh no, man,
Yeah.
take it
Like,
back."
man,
Like,
yeah.
think about it for a second.
Let someone proofread this before
Exactly.
you send it.
Yeah, exactly.
You know what's kind of amazing though is like I can see people making those kinds of slip ups when they're talking. It's
Yeah.
another thing entirely to like write it down,
Right.
make a second copy potentially because you spilled ink on the first
Exactly.
one, and then be like, yeah,
Exactly.
that's like
No, they meant-
multiple layers of filters that it has to go
Think
through.
about it a
She's
lot
just
longer
saying-
than like a text, you know?
And so the person meant
Harder
it to be read by the other person.
Exactly.
Harder to defend
Exactly.
yourself.
That education thing is an interesting idea for for those of the viewers who aren't aware of like what the educational system sort of was like. Is that when children were young,
Yep.
basically until like mid elementary school age,
Mhm.
correct me if I'm wrong, Lynn, they were educated by their moms at home. That was typically
Exactly.
that, and
Yep.
that responsibility of women having to educate those children, so that the women have to be educated because they need to do that, is an early
Yeah.
idea of like Republican motherhood, right, Lynn? Am I right?
Exactly.
Right. That's a
Exactly.
term for that's a historical a term from
Term for that.
historians.
Yes.
Yeah, to describe
Linda
that
Kerber came up
responsibility.
with
Yep.
right. It was the way that it was argued that women had a role in citizenship, in
Yes.
that it was their job to raise their sons to be good citizens. So it's
Yeah.
kind of the way you placate women and say, no, you are citizens because you're raising.
Yeah,
citizens.
exactly. It served all
Well,
its
I think
purposes.
there's some value in it overall. If you think of them as educators in addition, I think it's a little bit less, or a little bit more, slightly more than placation.
Yeah,
Just
slightly.
a little bit.
Slightly. And then even during a war, like they were doing or having, schools were suspended, so there wasn't even schools, little elementary
right.
schools that the kids could go to. It all went on to the mother, and Abigail took that as a sacred duty. But she was telling John, we're reaching a point here where we're going to have to go. The boys, we're going to have to go to a real school. I have nothing more to tell them. So hurry up and finish the war.
Right, because I mean, we know with George Washington that his half brothers went to England for
Yes.
education, and that
Yes.
obviously is probably not happening while we're at war with that empire. So now we have to find a secondary education for
Exactly.
these sons, beyond the home.
That's an interesting that is actually a really real importance for people, whoever is educating the kids, to actually be educated in themselves. My wife and I have a 16-month-old son, and even just thinking out into the future, we're like, my wife is like, I don't really want to send him to school. I'm going to feel so bad having him away. Let's just homeschool him. And not judging anyone that homeschools, but the conversation went something along the lines of with my wife is like, if we are going to teach him, we have to know stuff. I was like, do you
Hold on, we have to teach him math?
Yeah. I was like, do you remember how to do teach long division? I was like, I don't really remember anything from that side. I know a little bit about the 18th century, but I don't think we can just do history.
No.
Right, yeah.
You can try to get away with it, but it probably wouldn't last long.
No. Or he'd be getting an education like these guys would have gotten at the time.
Yeah, exactly.
Those books, historical books, and that wouldn't serve him very well. But yeah, it's really important.
I have as I was making notes, going through all the letters for the book, I was making notes of. I was really impressed of who Abigail. Now, this is a person. She lived a normal life, about 75 years, and the number during the time of the war and the founding era, these are the people that she either knew pretty well or met or had some type of interactions with. And I made a quick list of them. And I'm, you're shocked when you read the list if you want to do them real quickly.
Sure.
Well, let's hear it. Yeah.
Okay. Well, first, George and Martha Washington, who she loved, of course. She loved, and Lynn would know this very much. She loved Martha, even though their feelings about slavery and other things were radically different. She loved Martha and respected George a whole lot. You can't say, in too many terms how they liked them. But she also on the list is Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings. You would never know that. But when Tom brought Sally over as the nursemaid to Polly, his daughter, brought him over to France, that she had to stay with Abigail for about 3 weeks until Tom could arrange to bring him up or down to Paris. And so she got to know Sally Hemings pretty well.
And that's when she was in England, right? That's when her and John were in England? Okay.
The war ended. They hadn't signed the peace treaty yet, but they weren't aliens, illegal aliens staying there. Benjamin Franklin, who she wasn't impressed about. Henry Knox. She wasn't impressed at all.
Lynn, a woman after your own heart.
No,
Lynn never because I'm from Philadelphia. I am obligatory Ben Franklin fan. And Lynn never fails to sort of take digs at him.
I am very impressed with his accomplishments.
Yes.
I think he was a brilliant writer. He strikes me as creepy. It's just
that's a term I've never heard about.
I just think he's creepy.
It's true.
I admire him from afar, as I would if I were alive when he wrote it, just from afar.
Now remember, he lived through most of the 18th century, and he was already a legend when Abigail was growing up as a young child.
Right.
And so she was meeting him at her uncle's house near Braintree, and she met him, and he was just sitting at the table, didn't offer anything, looked bored. She wasn't impressed. Anyway, Paul Revere was their mailman sometimes, bringing communication from Congress to John's house. And so how would you like having Paul Revere as your mailman? Samuel and Elizabeth Adams, there's a story in there that's hilarious I won't go into. John and Dorothy Hancock, Abigail and John both disliked, not hated, but disliked Hancock because he's a spoiled rich kid and always acted like it. So,
is that why he made his signature so big on the declaration?
There's a legend about that, but and that's partly true if you know his personality. But it's also he was the president of Congress. And he said later, no, it is supposed to be that big. Well, whatever.
Okay.
How did you feel about the Sam Adams? I'm curious because Sam Adams was like, particularly, definitely not as similarly in volatility to her own husband. But it had a different sense of decorum, I think.
Sam Adams was John's second cousin, and he married a lady named Elizabeth Adams who passed away, and then he married another Elizabeth Adams, and
so he had a type.
Yeah. He never had to
all right, let's get married.
He never had to memorize a new name, and so, but he was a kind of basically a rich kid, and they weren't close friends, even though they're second cousins.
I mean, his reputation, I don't know too much about Samuel Adams outside of, the Sons of Liberty and his general reputation as a rabble rouser. But if she was attracted to John, I could see his lack of, his enjoyment of chaos being a little bit off-putting.
Yeah.
Right.
He was early rebel rouser with Hancock, but he was that first generation that changed out. But he, when he's going off to Boston or going off to Philadelphia, John he didn't feel right riding in a coach. He always went horseback wherever he went. And just the opposite for his cousin. And John had to teach him up there how to ride a horse because carriages aren't always around and you look kind of ridiculous.
Wow.
And one of the most amazing things I found was John Paul Jones. They ran into him in Paris, Abigail. And if you had a preconceived idea about the swashbuckling pirates, get rid of that because John Paul Jones was exactly the opposite. And she went into some detail about he'll pick out your perfume for you and the very best toilet wear that you can imagine.
This is John Paul Jones?
John Paul Jones, yeah.
All right.
And it's in the book. So
John Paul Jones is a little bit of left of field for most American revolutionary, even just casual fans, because he hasn't been. I think he hasn't really been featured in any of the popular media about the revolution.
Yeah, he's always left out.
He was, and you feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but because I'm coming at this from just a very, very small knowledge mostly from Lynn's husband, Bo, who portrays John Paul Jones on occasion as a living historian. But he was basically like a captain of ships, and then was sort of sailing around. He raided some places in the UK.
Yeah.
Is that sort of correct?
He attacked a couple towns off the coast of England and successfully took some stuff away, but he returned it later on. He said, "Here, I stole this. I didn't mean to do it. So here you are back." But he was kind of different. But probably the strangest guy would be Alexander Hamilton, who at least John and Abigail both intensely hated. Intensely isn't even strong.
Okay. I mean, I can, from what we've learned about Hamilton, he seems like a love him or hate him kind of guy. But did she say why she hated him?
Because he was dangerous to the Republic. He was always meddling behind the scenes to throw elections. And that's just one of his things. And so John had called him the bastard brat of a Scotch peddler.
I do remember that quote.
For starters.
Which, if you take out the moralizing,
right,
it's kind of accurate.
It's facts, you know.
But Abigail had, and by the way, Abigail was very religious, we know. But she also believed in a pseudoscience called, I'm going to get this one, physiognomy.
Physiognomy. What's that?
Physiognomy is a science where you can tell something about a person's soul by looking at their face and their eyes.
Oh.
And she used physiognomy on Alexander Hamilton, said, "Oh, I have read his heart in his wicked eyes many a time. The very devil is in." So she was a big.
Okay, so Abigail
she was
says
a big fan.
that Hamilton's is possessed by the devil. Okay,
yeah.
That's interesting. How if you don't mind me asking a couple more questions of physiognomy.
I know, right?
Yeah.
Because I'm curious. Was it a popular thing, or is it like a New England thing? Is it?
I don't know. I know John didn't say that he also practiced it, but later on in my book, he says, "And Abigail, I used your physiognomy to explore whoever that was." So I don't know past that point. Yeah,
because I've heard that phrase before. Like I've read something like that phraseology of in Letters from the Era, talking about someone trying to understand what was underneath somebody's intentions.
Exactly. Yeah.
But it's I'm curious how now in my head I'm like, were they all practicing physiognomy?
Right.
Is that what they were discovering?
And they're staring at each other.
Or...
Right.
Yeah.
That's a fascinating era of or thing to uncover. It's very, very cool. Most books probably wouldn't touch on that.
They don't, for a number of reasons that we talked about. But yeah. One of my favorite other letters that we get into the other ones if you want to get shut down by the FCC. But
this is a podcast. This is the Wild West of,
I know.
Okay.
Of broadcasting. We can go wherever you want.
We'll do some of those then just to get people's attention. When she was in London, the second time, she is meeting a lot of expatriates in London. And one of them was a Bohemian sculptress named Patience Wright.
I know that name.
And
I don't.
When they met her, they're walking away, she and Nabby, her daughter, and another woman. And Abigail called Patience Wright the Queen of Sluts. And I looked at, and I read it for the first time and said, "Oh, no, you did not say that, Abigail. The Queen of Sluts."
The word slut extends that.
Honestly,
That's
did
crazy
not.
to me. I did not know.
Well,
we need to look that up in the Oxford English Dictionary.
In all fairness, I looked up in the Johnson Dictionary of the 18th century or something. And in all fairness, the word slut, I can't even believe she said that. The word slut stands for a person who is slovenly or unkept.
Oh,
Interesting.
okay. Well, that's...
But it catches your attention.
Using it in that particular context feels like the implication was different. But
exactly.
Maybe that's present. That could be just me projecting. When you say Bohemian, do you mean like from Bohemia?
No, she didn't follow she didn't change her clothes often and didn't wash them and sort of like that.
Bohemia was a place, right? Am I like an actual place, or am I totally making that up? I could be lying.
Gosh, I don't know, Isaac.
I'm going to do a quick search before.
Okay, you do a Google search. Wow.
One of my favorites is the controlling side of Abigail, because she had a certain quality and she wanted to control certain situations and people. Her youngest sister, named Betsy, Abigail wanted her to marry well. And while she was in Europe, Betsy got engaged to this minister student who was staying at her father's house. And so when she was criticizing her little sister's choice in a groom, she said, now this is her sister, she talked about, "I see the urchin is as deaf as well as blind." So in other words, your choice was not a good choice.
So she's saying that she's deaf and blind?
Yeah, she's deaf and blind.
That's why she chose him?
Right.
That's funny.
Wow. Well, I don't know. I feel like that is a little relatable with sisters.
Yeah.
That is. that's maybe not if you're marrying him, but definitely for,
Definitely.
you went out with that dude? Yeah.
So yeah, Bohemia is a place. It's a region. I think it's currently in the Czech Republic, next to Bavaria, actually. So like,
it still exists.
I think it's used to describe a region, but at various times in history, it was its own independent kingdom. It would have at this time would have been a kingdom independently, I think, or at least within living memory of what we're talking about. It would have been a place. So,
and is apparently known for
slovenly sluts.
Yes. Yes. That's what it says.
According to Abigail, then. According to Abigail.
It's according to Abigail. Please go and write us, and we don't think that way.
Listeners in the Czech Republic, when Abigail was a hate mail, please.
I know. Yeah. Please don't. Send it to Isaac.
Send it to me. Send it to
when Abigail was back in the United States, John was vice president. She was meeting a delegation of Creek Indians that were visiting George Washington.
1790?
She wrote,
17, yeah.
Okay.
And she wrote to her sister Mary, these are very fine-looking men who have a fine shape. I'm thinking, Abigail,
I think that's translatable.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is weirdly, Lynn and I have actually done a bunch of work on that particular delegation there, but this is a weird fact. The Creek men were actually exceptionally tall. And they were very, very large, intimidating, fit humans. So she's actually 100% correct.
Wow.
And kind of the opposite of her husband.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
But that's very funny that she said so.
Yeah.
And
I like what I saw. Yeah.
What I saw.
These guys from Tennessee.
I have a couple I never knew parts if you want to.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, let's get into it.
Abigail's grandson, William Steuben Smith, who was Nabby's son, became a pirate sailing the Caribbean later on. So you saw that one coming right away. And he only did it. And he only did it for a year. Then he came back and went with his brother John Quincy to Europe as a secretary. But
it's like a gap year, but it's a pirate year.
Yeah,
it's a year. What do they do? Like it's a year at sea or whatever. That's like a weird thing that some college students do. Like
like their gap year, before you go to college. After
there's some specific term that I'm not remembering for that.
I'm going to be a pirate and sail the Caribbean. When John had finally retired from everything, 1801, Abigail was complaining in a letter that he doesn't do anything. He sleeps and reads romance novels. And I'm thinking, well, I'd never read that in a book anywhere. So
I need
romance novels.
Yeah.
What romance
novels
John
look up
Adams
what was popular at the time.
Reading.
Yeah, exactly.
Semester at sea. That's the phrase that I was thinking of. Semester at sea.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's his semester
what he
at
did.
sea.
Yeah.
Yes.
Kind of a weird thing. Abigail's grandson, George Washington Adams, and it seems that depression and alcoholism ran through the Smiths and the Adams family quite a bit. But there's a pretty scary part when George Washington Adams was a depressed, paranoid, alcoholic riverboat gambler. And one night in 1829, his outer clothes and pocket watch and wallet and everything was laid out on the boat's outdoor seat, but he was missing. And the body was washed up on shore 4 days later and declared a suicide.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So, and there's a lot of other alcoholic stories in both the Smiths and the Adams. Alcohol was not regulated then, and you made it as strong and as weak as you can make it. But you dig into some of these and you feel sorry for them, but then you dig into other ones and they're very, very uplifting or happy.
Yeah.
Like some of Abigail's final words. In the last 2 years...
go ahead. Sorry, I didn't mean to. No, I didn't mean to interrupt.
In the last 2 years of her life, she felt something was going on, and she had typhoid fever. And she wrote out her will and wrote out a really nice thing about sunshine. Has always made me feel happy, and without sunshine, it's harder to be happy. Something I just butchered it, but that's how my book ends. But
Wow.
But she
that's
she
very
lived
sweet.
75 years.
Yeah. That's
very sweet.
I mean, that's a good life for.
When
Oh,
did
yeah.
So when did she pass? What year?
It was 1818.
1818. So,
She was
here's a
born.
question that I don't think I've ever seen. Well, how did she feel like? What was her relationship with John Quincy? I
Yeah.
mean, we always talk about her
Yeah.
relationship with John, but her son was super accomplished and did a ton, and she
Mhm.
obviously lived to see him do a lot.
She raised the president. Yeah.
Yeah, she didn't make it to president, but she made him, I think, he was Secretary of State when she passed. But her relationship from afar was very good. I mean, she always gave him the best of everything, always wrote the best letters to him, but controlled parts of it. Like he fell in love before, when he got out of Harvard, he fell in love with the girl and marry her. And she said, "No, you aren't. She's not good enough for you." And so,
Sure,
things
mothers
like
can
that.
relate to that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely. And so her relationship on surface was pretty good. How it was below, don't know. One other thing I picked up that relates Abigail to all of us in the book and is not in any other book is her love of animals. And Louisa Adams, who was John Quincy's wife, called the old house that they were living in, a nice house, Peacefield, called it Noah's Ark because there were so many animals hanging around.
Nice.
Abigail loved songbirds and dogs. Real quick funny story. She couldn't figure out cats. When
can?
she was when she was in, and you'll appreciate this, Lynn. When she was in Paris, she didn't make friends with anybody. Nobody came to call her, and vice versa, because she didn't speak French. And so
Fair.
she did notice all the wealthy women in their spas and everything had cats. And she'd scratch her head because they had cats on the farm, but that was to keep the rat population down.
Mm-hmm.
But she said she wrote home to Mary, but I think I have to get a cat. She almost sounded like she was a cat to fit in around here. Cats have no loyalty and they don't care about you only when they want something. And so she was not a cat. She was not a cat
She was not a
person.
cat person, no.
No.
a cat lady, huh?
No, not at all.
Did she get a cat?
There's
we
no
know?
record of that, but there's no record of it. I would think not, but you never know.
Societal pressure. Got to get a cat.
Yeah, exactly. But she was leaving Paris on the day she's leaving, and the last thing to come out she ordered was a bird cage of her songbird because she loved the song melodies that the birds made. And the very last passenger to get into the car and go to London was two of her songbirds, and the songbirds made such a commotion that they were going to kill themselves inside the cage. And so she sat right there just before they took off and bequeathed them to her chambermaid to keep forever. So,
No,
but
I was going to say, I can't imagine bringing birds on a ship like that. Like,
Right?
I know, yeah, exactly.
yeah, be stowed away for multiple months while you cross the ocean.
It's not a
Yeah,
Carnival
exactly.
cruise. Those ships were small by today's standards. Terrifyingly small.
She was had a phobia against deep, dark water, and there weren't a lot of bridges in America at that time, and you had to go to a ferry or somehow to get across to the other side. And the Atlantic Ocean is nothing but deep, dark water, so you can tell how much she wanted to see John. But she described they were sick for 10 days, seasick, and she describes trying to walk on the deck as a combination of water, grease, and puke.
Ugh.
It's
That sounds
sounds
delightful.
another
Put that
ocean
in the
cruise. Yeah,
advertisement.
exactly. So these are all the type of things I ran across, and I go, I never read that before. I'll put it in my book, So
It makes
that's
her
great.
seem so real.
Yeah.
It's like just like us. We all have our flaws. We all do stupid things. We all
exactly,
have happy times.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that this kind of work is probably, I don't know, you could say better than me, Lynn, a trend in modern popular history writing where we want to relate to people.
Mm-hmm.
If we want to feel connected to them, it's not, you're not painting a picture of someone to idolize necessarily.
Right.
Or
an
trying
unreal
to,
picture.
Yeah, paint a real picture of a person who you might have
That's what I was trying to do in the book. Yeah.
It's
I
very
think
cool.
history is relatable. people want to read relatable history.
Yeah,
It's like this whole reality show. Like, well, we can't have reality shows with all of these folks, but we can at least have, learn about the silly things they did and, their home life and who they were. So
they were
that
just
it feels
like real
we know
people.
them.
The thing I like, my favorite quote is from the late David McCullough. He said, the best part about being a historian is that you get to read other people's mail. And I thought, well, that's...
And get paid for it sometimes.
And get paid for it. So that makes perfect sense.
Maybe.
Maybe. But at least it's enjoyable.
So was there anything unexpected or funny or exciting about her being First Lady? Because I know she differed from Martha.
Yeah.
And Martha had done her, they're not salons, she called them levees. And the best description we have is from Abigail talking about the people visiting, having lemonade and tea and all these things.
Yeah.
So, is there anything that sticks out to you from her first ladyship, or anything maybe precedent she sent, or anything like that?
She identified all of the contributions that Martha did in comparison to her own. Like, her own were pushing women's education, spreading anti-slavery as much as she'd be allowed to do it. But primarily and I invented some of this, is being thought of as John's chief of staff. And the word chief of staff wasn't around until like the Truman administration. But he begged her to come up, please, and help me. And she knew he would just disintegrate if it wasn't for her keeping things organized. And she would never lie to him, and he knew that, so he could always take what she wanted. But being a chief of staff was the thing that she really took up. And I'll close right here. But there's two quotes that I pulled out from the book, and one of them has to do with her chief of staff status. Real quickly, when John lost the election to Thomas, Abigail said, I'm out of here. She got in the cart and was going off back home. And she's about halfway down or halfway up. And John caught up with her in a letter and said, wait, you can't go. I want to name a bunch of judges to the post before I leave.
Minute. Yeah.
And I don't know who to do.
Move.
Exactly. He started it. And I don't know who to do. You're the only person that can tell me. And so and I've seen this. I got to hold the actual letter in my hand in Massachusetts Historical Society. And basically, she did some blotting out because you didn't have erasers on quill pens. And she actually wrote, okay. I want to see the list of judges. So she acquiesced to that. But that really points her to the fact that she was like a chief of staff and did her job even after the election was over. I want to see the list of judges.
Yeah, I think that's a really great space to end, because it brings us full circle. And because we started this talking about how she's an impressive woman, and had she, had the time been different and had opportunities for women been different, she definitely would have been not adjacent to power, but someone in the mix of power.
And she could have done that job very easily with everything she knew and who she was.
Right. It sounds like they were partners. And I think that's something you always hear about George and Martha, but it needs to be more emphasized with John and Abigail as well. Yeah.
The only thing I can think of in newer years was maybe Jimmy Carter and Rosalind, but I mean, this one didn't even go that strong. No, it was a true partnership, even though she didn't have the power and was recognized as not having the power to do it. John always depended on her deeply. And except for the bad legislation, I can't think of it as huge at the very end, which she said, you should sign on to this one. Except for that, she always made the right decision. Wow, what's that?
Tell us, where can we find your book? I mean, we want everyone to go out to learn more about Abigail. When is it going to be released? Where can they find it?
The book is right there.
Yes, if you're on
watching
YouTube.
if you're on YouTube, you can see the book
Yes.
on the shelf behind
Yeah,
John.
I mean, there, yeah.
Abigail's peeking over his shoulder, watching
She
every
is.
move.
I know that. And it's being mailed out. It started being mailed out last Friday to all the bookstores first. And they'll be starting to roll through. I think Bruce Franklin said in the month of May. And so
That's great.
Barnes and Noble will get it, and then Amazon will certainly get it.
Mhm.
And it's a very unusual book because of all of I try to make it very readable, just like what we were talking about.
Right.
Mhm.
Good summer
And
reading.
Good Summer Reading, it was
Beach
called.
reading,
Yes.
yes.
Yep. Exactly.
And so the name of the book is The Unexpected Abigail Adams, A Woman Not Apt to Be Intimidated. And if you're Googling John Smith and those things, if you come across a photo of him and Robert Redford, you've got the right guy.
Bob.
Yes.
Yeah.
Bob
He's lived an
retired.
exceedingly interesting life and done some
Yeah.
very fascinating things, but those pale in comparison to how fascinating and interesting his book is and his take on
Yes.
Abigail, which I think is
Thank you.
fantastic and going to be
I
a great
think-
read for go and get it. Do it now.
I like that.
By the
Thank
time
you
this
so
comes out,
much.
it's available.
That's right.
Run.
Order online. Go to the store.
Run to the whatever local bookstore.
Yes. Support local bookstores.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us, John.
you're
And
welcome.
if you enjoyed this conversation, please subscribe to the YouTube channel. Go follow the podcast on wherever you can get your podcasts. And if you really enjoyed this conversation, if you are so inclined, check out our Patreon at patreon.com/primary source media. Every dollar spent there goes directly to supporting the creation of this show, and you get some
Great.
access to some little goodies, and you may even be able to get a chance to win a copy of John's book. So
Great.
just a teaser there.
Thank you so much.
Autographed. Yes.
Yeah, potentially signed.
Yes.
Potentially signed.
Potentially
So-
signed. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for being with us, John. This is wonderful.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, Lynn. Thank you, Isaac. Thank you.